So, hey, welcome back to Accelerated Investor. Hey, Josh here. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm always so honored and grateful and feel so privileged to share with you through this podcast. Today, I am interviewing a good friend of mine named John Ruhlin. I actually went to the Home Run Derby when the Home Run Derby was in Cleveland in 2019, and Cleveland hosted the All-Star Game. John and I went to the Home Run Derby with Ryan Morand, another friend of mine who owns capitalism.com. And John and I were talking about gifting. His business is gifting. And you might think like that's a little bit strange, but here we are at the holidays. People are thinking about giving gifts. And John is the founder of the Ruhlin Group. He is, check this out, the number one seller of Cutco knives and Cutco cutlery of all time. And what he does is he is a purposeful gifter. He is an expert gifter. He's actually a strategy consultant, works with companies like, check this out, the Chicago Cubs, Morgan Stanley, Keller Williams, the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Shell Oil Company, Caesar's Palace. And he works with them to do exotic luxury gifting that's going to make a difference. Think about what is life? What is business? It's relationships. It's relationships. And so in this interview, I interview John and we talk about, he actually interviews me and my wife about some things that are important to us about relationships and deepening relationships with clients, with vendors. So think about your real estate business for a minute. Think about your investing. Think about your private lenders. Think about your brokers. Think about the people, your employees, your staff. And John is going to completely flip the script on how to take care of those people and drive deeper relationships through what we call randomized, planned gifting. You're going to love this interview with John Ruhlin. Take a listen.
Welcome to the Accelerated Investor Podcast with Josh Cantwell. If you love entrepreneurship and investing in real estate, then you are in the right place. Josh is the CEO of Freeland Ventures Real Estate Private Equity and has personally invested in well over 500 properties all across the country. He's also made hundreds of private lender loans and owns over 1,000 units of apartments. Josh is an expert at raising private money for deals, and he prides himself on never having had a boss in his entire adult life. Josh and his team also mentor investors and entrepreneurs from all over the world. He doesn't dream about doing deals. He actually does them, and so do his listeners and students. Now sit back, listen, learn, and accelerate your business, your life, and your investing with the Accelerated Investor Podcast.
So hey guys, welcome back to Accelerated Investor. I am with John. John, thanks so much for joining us today on Accelerated Investor. We have a special guest, not only John Ruhlin from Giftology Group, but my wife, Lisa Marie, is here because she is championing our effort to take care of our staff, our employees, and our investors, and what does gifting mean? So John is an amazing entrepreneur. You've already heard that in the introduction that we've done. So John, let me ask you, first of all, welcome to Accelerated Investor. And
thanks.
John, tell me, what is your definition of gifting? When you think of gifting, with all the amazing clients and all the gifting that you've done and helped them do, what is your definition of gifting?
Yeah, well, I had the opportunity recently to speak to a group of mid-market CFOs, and the guy who gave me the introduction was like a 15-minute long introduction. And you could tell, like, every CFO in the audience, like, is this guy really going to talk for 60 minutes about gifting? Like, does he not realize what budget I cut first? Like, at every company, like, nobody wakes up at 4 a.m. and says, man, I got to do my miracle morning. I got to go buy some gifts, and then my business will like 100x. But every business, whether you're an investor, real estate related, or you're the Chicago Cubs, every business rises and falls on relationships. Could be relationships with investors, could be relationships with subcontractors, mentors, advisors, banks, you name it. It's every business it's a relationship business. And yet most people, if they're honest with themselves, like, they think they're a 7 out of 10 on gifting and gratitude, but really they're -3. Nobody's ever really challenged them and said, you sent me a bottle of wine and my dad was an alcoholic. Or you sent me a gift card to Amazon and I invested $250,000 with you last year. Like, that's how you show gratitude and appreciation for my big investment. And so most people don't understand that nobody cares about gifting, but they care about the way they make somebody feel. And so when somebody hires us, they're like, John, I want to order like 5,000, Bose headsets. I'm like, no, you don't. Like, you want to deepen these 5,000 relationships, or maybe not even 5,000. Let's pare it back. Maybe it's only 500 that really matter. So the core of our business is really understanding, if you have a business plan, an operations plan, a marketing plan, what's your relationship plan? And if you don't have one, then somebody else is going to take that investor away, or somebody else is going to take that employee away. So the core of our business is really walking people step by step through what we call the giftology system. And I'd love to walk you guys through that, because I think that most people have done, leadership training, sales training, but most people have never really segmented their relationships and said, what's the value of this relationship currently, and what could it be lifetime? And then what's the math equation? What should I reinvest back into that relationship to make sure that I keep them, that I grow with them, and maybe I get that investor or that employee to go talk to somebody else and recruit somebody else into the family. That's the secret sauce. So
right.
if you guys are cool with it, I'll ask you guys a few questions just to kind of provide a little bit of framework. And then we can do like a little fireside chat and just talk through, how you guys in 2021 and beyond can pour into your relationships to start to continue to grow.
Yeah, let's do it. We're looking forward to that for sure. Because I think, like you said, John, our concept of gifting is birthdays, maybe work anniversaries, and Christmas time, the holidays. I think that's what most people think. And when I was talking to Lisa about getting ready for this podcast, I'm like, I went to the home run derby with John last year and with Ryan Moran, and we talked about gifting. And John does not believe in just giving people gifts at Christmas. And we're both kind of thinking like, what? Everybody does that. So yeah, what are we going to do different? So yeah, let's jump into it, man. What are some of the questions we should be asking ourselves? Help us walk through the plan.
Yeah, well, let's talk about timing first, because whether you outsource it to an agency like ours or whether you do it on your own, most people are doing what I call ABC gifting. They do anniversaries, birthdays, and Christmas. And whether it's for your spouse or whether it's for your best client, it's fine to do those, but like, you don't earn brownie points doing something for Lisa on Valentine's Day. Like, that's kind of expected. Like, you don't do it like for a birthday. Those are table stakes. And yet most people in business that, like, hey, you just invested 50 grand or $1 million. Hey, here's your gift. Like, if you're in the relationship business, you give a gift after a referral, after a deal's done. That's a tit for tat. You just turn that relationship into a transactional relationship. So the goal for us is, I call it planned randomness. We lay out for our relationships or our clients, hey, here's the 100 or 1,000 that matter, but let's lay out 4 times a year where we can surprise, like Ritz made it really popular to surprise and delight, but most people do their gifting and appreciation at expected obligatory times. Hey, we're having a conference, a summit, here's your gift. It doesn't feel very special when 1,000 other people are all getting their trinket, with a, the other thing is most people don't make the gift personal. They put their logo on it. They're like, John, I want to get branding out of this. And I'm like, do you really think your affluent, like million or $1 billion investor wants to wear your logo on some polo the size of a softball? Like, that's the last thing. They'll maybe wash their car with it. 90% of those things end up at Goodwill. And people will tout like being green. I'm like, if you want to be green, stop giving stuff that's from China with a logo on it that ends up at the landfill or at Goodwill. And so I tell people, you would never go to somebody like your best friend's wedding and take this Tiffany's vase, compliments of the Cantwell family. Like, that would be the cheesiest thing in the world, but we do that in business. We call it branding and marketing. And you're really spending money to offend or annoy or frustrate the other person who has gift guilt. They want to say thank you because that's the right thing to do. But really, they're thinking, I'll never wear this, or I'll wear it one time a year when I golf with Josh, out of obligation. But nobody's like, you're not moving somebody's heart. And we all know that, like, we have this gut feeling when we meet with an investor, we meet with a client, we meet with an employee, like, do I like this person? Do I trust them? And they don't realize when you give a gift that's like, people will say, well, John, it's the thought that counts. And I'm like, like, tell your wife that, like, hey, it's the hot thought that counts, honey, go buy your own gift. Like, that would never work. But we do that in business. We don't realize that we're communicating that other person doesn't matter. So all of these little details, as you're walking through, you have to put yourself in the other person's shoes and say, would I really want to wear some XYZ accounting firm's logo on my Lululemon jacket? Probably not. I'd wear my own. I wear my own initials, but I'm never going to put like where somebody else's and feel good about that. That's not a gift. It's a manipulation. Here, you gave me $1 million. Here, go be an advertisement for me to your friends. Like it just
Right.
it feels icky, it feels gross. So those are some of the, like, as you're thinking through, like the thought processes that we walk people through, and they're like, oh my gosh, like, John, you mean gift cards are bad? And I'm like, yeah. You mean consumables are bad? I'm like, yeah. They're like, John, that's what we've been doing for the last 30 years. Like, what is a good gift? And so what I'll say, and I'll transition into, is, this year in 2020, we realized our humanity, like, because of COVID and whatever else, like, all of a sudden things have slowed down and people are traveling out of state, not necessarily like just on vacation. They're moving to another part of the country, or they're taking their family on an adventure for a month or two, like we are in Austin. And we've realized like what really matters. And so the one thing that we do every single time, no matter who we're giving it to, whether it's a billionaire, whether it's an employee, janitor, CEO, I don't care, is we always personalize something with somebody's name. In 2020, with everything digital and all these other things, we think, well, John, that doesn't matter. And I'm here to tell you, like Stephen Ross, who's a client of ours, the Miami Dolphins, he's worth like $12 billion, invested in Vaynerchuk's company. And he gave $250 million away to the University of Michigan, which, being an Ohio boy, like, pissed me off.
Yeah, right.
And I'm like, why would somebody who lives in Florida, in New York most of the time, give $250 million away? And I'm like, duh, there's going to be 100 buildings at the University of Michigan. It's going to be like the Stephen A. Ross cafeteria and library and MBA program and you name it. His name is that important for somebody that's worth $12 billion to go and have it on the side of a wall. Imagine how much more important it is for somebody that's worth maybe $2 million or $20 million. We will not allow a single gift to go out unless it's personalized with that person's name. The other thing that's super important, 90% of the gifting that we do is family-centric. People are like, John, this guy likes bourbon. This guy likes golf. I'm like, I don't care what he likes. Is he married? Almost all the time it's a yes. And I'm like, what's his inner circle's names? And they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, yeah. What's his wife's name? What's his assistant's name? What's his kids' names? What's his pet's names? When we walk out a plan, 90% of the budget, marketing, biz dev, relationship building budget, is targeted at the inner circle. And the reason is that if you spend, $1,000 on somebody that gets to stay at the Ritz or flies private or whatever else, they get treated like a king, whether it's a guy or a gal. I want to take care of the people around them. So for you guys, what I would say is, let's say you have a few hundred investors. Some of the homework, if we were to engage, would be like, hey, go make sure that you know their assistant's name, document that, get the spelling right, make sure that we know spouses' names. When we engrave, like our most popular gift this year in the last 20 years has been Cutco knives. People are like, really stupid knives? I'm like, everybody in 2020, but even before, like, whether you have a $50,000 kitchen or a $5 million kitchen, everybody has a kitchen, and breaking bread with family and friends. That's why you take people out to dinner all the time. But if you can do something that includes that person's family and spouse with something that's engraved, like we did one, this is a little over the top. One of our clients hired us to gift Tony Robbins. And they're like, what could you give Tony Robbins that he doesn't already have 1,000 of? And I said, Pete, we're going to gift him a knife set. And he's like, seriously, knives? I said, yeah, but this is not going to be like a normal knife set. This is going to be a $6,000 knife set, handmade, 32 knives. Every knife, all 32, is going to have 64 quotes of Tony's wisdom that he's spoken over the last 40 years. And then it's going to go inside a wood box. It's like a $2,000 wood box that has a custom video screen. When he opens it, it'll start playing. And after this landed, I called it a love bomb. So it was like a $7,000, $8,000 package. Sage, Tony's wife, called and said, Pete, this is one of the most thoughtful gifts anybody's ever given us. It wasn't about the knives. It was about what's engraved into it. Now it's an instant heirloom. She used those words, instant heirloom. His kids and future grandkids are going to fight over this knife set because of what it represents. We're going to use this at every family gathering, and like every Christmas, everything centers around food and family. Like go back to the Last Supper. Like we've been doing the same thing for thousands of years, which is break bread with our inner circle, with the people that matter most to us. And so oftentimes when we're laying out a plan, people are like, John, I have these investors. We can't, they can afford anything they want. I'm like, that's true. But if you hit them at the heart level, at the artifact, at the legacy level, at the heirloom level, and make them look good to their spouse and their assistant and their kids, like that's something that we all, I don't care if you're a billionaire, we all want our legacy and our kids and our families. Like there are certain things that are common amongst humanity. But if you don't have the spelling of somebody's spouse's name, you can't tie them in that way. And so people are like, oh, John, that's too much work. And I'm like, I won't allow you to work with us unless you're willing to do some of those little data points, those little details, because that's what takes it from being Like in 2020, we don't need more crap, more stuff showing up, but we all have room for an artifact. We all have room for something that makes, that ties to us as a human being, that ties to our family, that ties to our legacy. So as we'd walk through, we'd say, hey, list off all these relationships, list off all of their spouses, list off all of their assistants, list off all of their home addresses. And if you don't have that info, then you have some homework to do. And then once you start doing that, we start saying, hey, we're going to start laying out 4 times a year, twice a year, whatever the frequency is. We're going to send things. They're never going to know what's coming when, but you do. You could plan out for the next 5 years. Here's the love bombs we're going to send to all of these investors. And what I would say for you guys specifically is if somebody is not as valuable to you from a monetary perspective, it doesn't mean you give them a cheaper gift. It just means you might not hit them as frequently. That's where I see people like even pro sports teams doing this. They'll dictate and they'll be like, oh, this person's like a JV level. And I'm like, they still gave you $500,000. Like you can send them some junior varsity trinket. So I'm gonna stop right there and say what thoughts are going through your guys' mind as I've shared some of these different parts of the recipe.
My newest and most powerful real estate investing book, The Flip System, is now available. And for a limited time, you can grab your free copy at getflipsystem.com/podcast. Using the same proven principles, secrets, and investing strategies I'm sharing in this book, I've been able to personally close over 750 highly profitable real estate deals over the last 15 years, make over 400 private lender loans, raise over $30 million of private money, and acquire over 2,000 units of apartments. Get my newest book now for free for a limited time at getflipsystem.com/podcast. That's getflipsystem.com/podcast.
I think it's awesome. I just want to know how you're Pink Panthering these people to find out the information.
She's the Pink Panther, John. So she's got, even on the back of her phone, she's got a picture of the Pink Panther. If you want to find out anything about anyone, Lisa will figure it out. So she's wondering now, if we're going to gift to the spouse, the wife, the kids, the assistant, how do you do that without just infiltrating them? Or maybe you just do call them. Maybe that's part of the advice you'll give us, is just to ask them. But that's where we're probably the first thing to figure out. How do you rope in the family? A lot of people are
private and they up certain.
No. Well, I would say the higher up the food chain you go, the more public somebody is. Finding their spouse on public records or on social, or they go to galas or whatever else. So there is a little bit of professional stalking involved, or Pink Panthering, as you like to call it. I like that. If it's okay, I'm gonna reuse that phrasing. Pink Panthering. I love that, and I'm a Pink Panther fan myself. But we call it professional stalking, which is what I'll say is that one of the reasons that we recommend doing something for somebody's assistant is they're treated like the gatekeeper. They're treated like a second-class citizen, and they have all the inside information on the company, the individual, the family. And when you honor that person and respect them, and you don't send them, like when I did the Orlando Magic, the CEO was cutting the checks of the Orlando Magic. Every time I sent a gift to Alex, the CEO, I sent the same gift to Cheyenne, the assistant, for 2 years, never asking for anything. When I wanted to get 5 minutes with Alex, guess what she made happen? She got 5 minutes with Alex. What I didn't realize is she went and advocated to every other department and division inside the Orlando Magic. The reason we landed a 6-figure deal with the NBA was because of Cheyenne, not because of Alex. So the reason that you honor the assistant, and it's pretty easy usually for people to get somebody's assistant's name, you start gifting that person, then you can go to them and say, hey, I want to honor Jim. I want to honor Steve. I want to honor Susie. Can you get, I just need a couple, data points. What's the dog's name? What kind of, what are the kids' names? What's the spouse's name? And so it's kind of a, 1.0 is you get as much data as you can, but it's way more of a delight when you didn't have to ask them directly. Because people will say, John, they'll reach out and say, hey, I want to send you a gift. I'm like, you just ruined half the gift.
Yeah.
If you show up at the Ritz and they know that you like a certain kind of bourbon and it's waiting in your room, and they didn't even have to ask you, you're like, your mind's blown. like, wow, they did their homework, they did details. It just shows an attention to detail and an intentionality and a thoughtfulness that anytime we have to ask for somebody's address, I'll say, hey, I want to send you a book. Well, like what I sent, I recently sent you something. Like, I didn't go to you directly. I went to the people around you that I knew would have your home address. I build relationships with the inner circle and triangulate if necessary in order to get that, because I want to surprise and delight somebody just like anybody else does. So, but if you get somebody's assistant to be on your side, they'll tell you shoe sizes, they'll tell you, they'll give you all kinds of information, and you don't want to use that in a manipulative way. But at the end of the day, like, to me, the event planner, the assistant, the people behind the people are oftentimes neglected and are oftentimes doing a lot of the heavy lifting. It's why I all of the gifting that we do, like my personal gifting budget this year is about $600,000. Over 450,000 of it was inclusive of assistants and spouses.
Nice.
Because there you can invest $1 and get $1,000 of impact. You can't outspend your competitors, your publicly traded competitors or some of those kind of people, but you can be more thoughtful than they can be. You can like build deeper relationships. And that's really where people are like, John, what's the ROI on this? I'm like, the return on relationships is pretty, like, oftentimes can be 20x, 50x, 100x. I've seen 1,000x. It's better than Facebook ads. It's better than dang near anything, because at the end of the day, like, you want that person to stick out their neck to have that conversation on the golf course or at the dinner table or at the meeting and say, you know what, you need to meet my friend Josh.
Yeah.
Those 3 words are worth, millions of dollars.
For us, what sticks out to me is there's 2 ways to raise capital. So I spend most of my time raising money for our real estate syndications, apartments, our fund, et cetera. And legally, there's 2 ways to do it. There's what's called 506B, which is relationship driven. You have to have a prior existing relationship with that investor before you can pitch them an offer on a deal to invest, let's say, in an apartment. Or you have the 506C, which is, it's just a general solicitation. You can have people come in, they can opt in through a funnel, you can nurture them through videos, and then they become an investor. I prefer the 506B route because when I get favorable introductions, people invest more, they invest more often, and they will refer us. Versus if somebody comes in through a funnel, let's say from a Facebook ad, they see that we're recruiting capital for a deal, they often start with much less money, right? And so it's maybe a $50,000 investment versus $250, or a $10,000 investment versus $200, because they don't trust us yet. They're like, I like the deal, but I don't know you. And it might take us 2 or 3 years to get to the same point. Versus if I met you through Ryan Moran and we've built that relationship and we're having a good time, there's already this level of sort of trust and honor and enjoying being around each other. So we've got some guys who now refer us on a regular basis, and they're bringing in investors who invest very quickly and very big with us. And I'm thinking, like, this polo, this little coat, just isn't going to cut it based off of everything you just told me. And if we want to get more capital, it's not really about maybe, like, this is what it's boiled down to. Do we run more Facebook ads or do we do more gifting? Right. Yeah. And that's becoming the thought in my head right now.
I mean, I think that there's still obviously room for other marketing channels. Sure. What I would say is that when you have, because oftentimes people want to use gifting or giftology as a way to go after prospects. And I'm like, if you have a fire that's already burning and you pour gasoline on the fire, what happens? It goes really big, really fast. But to take somebody from cold, speed of trust, like, that's difficult to be able to accelerate that. Now, gifting can help with that, but I think that once you already have, people that you're doing things because you want to, not because you have to. That's a big difference. Like with a spouse, if you show up on anniversaries, birthdays, Christmas, that's table stakes. You show up just because on random Tuesdays with a spa package or whatever her love language is, like, it's
service,
like, wow.
John, it's service. Her love language is service.
Absolutely. So
I know Lisa's love language.
Clean.
I gotta do stuff. She loves gifts, but she likes her dad, 82-year-old Italian, worked 6 days a week, was a barber, did everything. He washed
the floors.
He was in his nature to serve, right? The family, his wife, his kids. So that's where it comes from. And Lisa, for sure, is service related. So if I do things randomly, or just help around, with everything that she's working on. She loves that more so than an actual gift. So love language is hugely important. So we have to have a separate podcast about you, honey. But these investors. So let me give you some frameworks around this. We have over 300 investors.
Yep.
We probably have 100, I would say, that have invested big money with us. In our world, big money is at least $250,000 or more. We've got multiple people over $500,000, million or more. And then we've got plenty of people in that 10,000 to 200,000 range. I would like to take care of them all, because it's not just about the money that they invested with us, but it's about the relationship. It's about nurturing that relationship. And it's also about the referrals, the introductions, like you talked about earlier, that they may have. I believe in real estate, you want to network with people who can either buy a property from you, sell a property to you, who can invest with you or cheerlead for you, right? Sometimes the cheerleader, who's the loudest cheerleader with the biggest megaphone, but hasn't invested a nickel, is often worth more, just economically, than somebody that's invested $500,000, but who doesn't tell anyone.
Yep. Yeah. The sales champion or advocate. That's where sometimes people, like, we have a number of financial advisors that are clients that are like, oh, this person's a small client. And I'm like, are they hanging with other big clients? Could you inspire them to go be an advocate on your behalf? What's a referral lifetime value worth to you? And they're like, well, if we get $2 million assets under management, we make 1%. That's $20,000 a year for the next 10 years. That's a $200,000 relationship off of one referral. Most people haven't done the math to understand what, to your point, and they haven't done the 360-degree view of saying, who are all the relationships that are currently important to me or could be important to me, and how can I inspire them to go advocate on my behalf? That could be selling you a deal or opening their mouth or referring, or, to me, like, we have a number of suppliers. Like, I send nice gifts to Cutco, and they're like, well, you buy millions of dollars of product. Why would you send them a gift? And I'm like, I don't have a business without them. And I think oftentimes the circles that people run in, they're like, oh, I spend money with them. And I'm like, wouldn't you like them going out of their way when the chips are, down, or when you're backed into a corner? Wouldn't you like that subcontractor to drop another project and pick up your project? That doesn't happen on accident. That happens because of a relationship, because of you do things because of that's who you are, and you're generous and you're a giver. And when you show up that way for people, they're looking for opportunities to reciprocate. And that reciprocation looks differently at different times. But oftentimes when we're not, lining out a relationship plan, I start going into directions. People are like, well, they don't spend money with us. I'm like, but they could influence a deal, or they could help you finish a project faster, and they're like, oh yeah, you're right. And they're like, we probably should add them to the list. And I'm like, yeah, you probably should. Like, sometimes the people you said that are megaphones, they may never stroke a check, but they may have, the influence on the back end over the next 10 years could be, 7 or 8 figures. That's pretty powerful to start including them on the list. And oftentimes when you do that, they're like, I didn't write you a check. I didn't do anything. Like, why are you doing this? Just because? And it melts it short circuits. They're like, there was no referral given, no deal done. Like, you're just loving on the relationship. You care about me as a person, like, just out of the blue on a random Tuesday in March. Yeah. And you could take 10,000 people and do that to them, and every single person would get it because it wasn't tied to a transaction or a deal. They're like, wow. Like, and I've seen it happen where people are like, all of a sudden the relationship, there's a tipping point from it was like, yeah, we're kind of acquaintances, to know that Josh is my boy. Like, and that happens for a number of reasons. It's not just because of gifting. Like, gifting is just one of those vehicles, those delivery vehicles. But we all know when people start taking our call a little faster, or respond to our text a little quicker, or a little bit more thoughtfully. And that happens because the relationship is shifting. And that's really what we're going for, is to help accelerate those relationships with those sorts of things.
So if we wanted to get started with something like this, what are some things we should consider? Or what are some questions maybe that you need to ask us for us to be able to give you some feedback? Like, let's say we wanted to take care of these 300 people. Maybe there's 100 or so that maybe have invested more economically. And you had already indicated maybe you just don't gift as often to some of the others. Well, maybe,
I have a question.
Lisa, if you're going to champion this for us, what would you want to do?
So you sent us a gift, which was very generous and very thoughtful. where did you come up with the idea? Because I probably would have never thought of that. You know, most people send flowers, you know, close friends send a meal maybe or a gift card to a restaurant.
Yeah.
Your gift and one other stood out, like very different.
Yeah.
So one, thank you. And how do you come up with the idea of
what is what you're gonna give? So what I would say is that we're always learning too. I mean, I've been doing this for 20 years, so like somebody sent that to me, and actually it was the owner of the company said, hey, you know, I know something, you know, such happens, you know, just, you know, and I got it. My wife, who's like very discerning, she's like, wow, this is really thoughtful and powerful. And it's not like you're just quality and all those things that like a lot of times people are just checking the box.
Just the box was super thoughtful. Not what was in it, but the box and what it said.
Yeah. No, it's so it's to your, you know, it's like getting Tiffany or, you know, Apple, like the presentation, people do judge a book by its cover. They do judge a gift by its box. They judge it by the handwritten note or the note that comes with it. Like all of those things, people think they can cut corners.
Are you ready to automate and explode your real estate investing? We're searching for extremely motivated individuals who are sick and tired of wasting time and want to finally see real results from their real estate investing business. We're searching for investors looking to get to the next level and become a bigger, better version of themselves while being a more successful real estate investing entrepreneur. Apply for mentoring and coaching at joshcantwellcoaching.com/podcast. That's joshcantwellcoaching.com/podcast.
So they'll be like, oh, we did giftology, it didn't work. And I'm like, did you follow the recipe? And they're like, well, I kind of did giftology-ish. And I'm like, imagine if you bake bread and you just decide, you know, the next 1,000 times we're not going to put yeast in. I don't care if you do it 10,000 times, you're never going to get bread. Like that one little ingredient changes how it's perceived. It changes how it feels. And so a lot of times we're constantly trying things out on ourselves, on our relationships, on our clients. And that would be a great example of where, you know, we broke our own rule. Typically, we don't do consumables, but there are anomalies where it does make sense to do food. But if you are going to do food, you need to break the rule in a big way and do something really thoughtful and really nice, not just check the box. So like the knives, for instance, you know, like we've done that knife set either as a full Cutco knife set's like 12 grand. Most people aren't dropping 12 grand on one relationship. But what we realized was like we could drip on somebody and build them a full set sitting on their counter over the course of 3 or 5 or 10 years. People loved that because it was actually practical and useful. They love seeing their name engraved into it, or if they're a person of faith, we'd engrave scripture verses. We'd make really the item itself was just the kind of the blank canvas, but there was a practical nature to it. And so we have over 20 years perfected, and we kind of know what works in the recipe. Now, if I give out 1,000 gifts, even if I gave out 1,000 Ferraris, there still would be 3 people that would complain it was a yellow Ferrari instead of a red Ferrari. There'd still be people that would complain no matter what. And oftentimes when you're spending money on things, you're like, oh, I spent money in it and whatever. And I'm like, you don't focus on the 3, you focus on the 997 that were like, wow, like that's thoughtful. My wife, my husband thought it was amazing. You know, if they're texting you pictures 5 years later using the product, then you know you nailed it. Yeah. And you start to see that over time when people, everybody says thank you, but do they continue to bring it up 12 months later? And that's really like in almost all marketing, you're trying to figure out like with a Facebook ad or a billboard, like what's your cost per impression? And people will be like, John, the bottle of wine is cheaper than your stupid knife. And I'm like, yeah, but you only got 1 impression with that bottle of wine. Whereas the knife, it gets used once a day for the next 10 years. That's 3,600 times subconsciously and consciously that affluent person, that person you care about is thinking about you. Mm-hmm. You get referrals when you're top of mind, liked, and trusted. Most people haven't done a good job at the top of mind element. And so most of the things that we do tend to be family-centric, kitchen-centric, tend to be best in class in a category they normally wouldn't buy. Like most people would never drop $6 grand on a knife set, or they'd never drop, like the wine tools that we do aren't like $25 ones. They're like $450 ones that are handmade in Australia, which sounds like a lot of money until you realize most of your clients drink $100 bottles of wine. That's 4 bottles of wine.
Right. Right.
And now your client, your investor, is opening your competitor's wine with your tool, which is kind of fun to think that you're top of mind, even as they're consuming somebody else's, their accountant, their lawyer, their whatever. And so those are I'm trying to find those little areas where somebody would never go buy it for themselves, that they'd use it with their family, that it's very common to humanity, but that I could send it out to, 1,000 addresses in one day and have everybody receive it and be like, wow, I didn't even know this existed. I didn't know this. I never would have bought this for myself, but I'm really glad somebody thought to buy it and personalize it with my family's name. So now it's an artifact.
That's fantastic. So what do you think we should do for our investors?
So what does it cost, I think, is more of the question right now I have for personalizing. It would be fine if you're sending it randomly, like I like this idea. But for now, for us talking about Christmas, that's why we decided not to. The shipping to send to 300 people
is a lot.
If you're personalizing it all, because it's going to be separate to each person. You can't bulk ship, so you have to do it randomly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, that's one of the reasons, that's like a softball question. That's why we exist. So, somebody will hire us, whether it's to send to 50 people or 5,000 people. We partner with our vendors and we have people on site that handwrite the notes. So I can drop ship to 500 different addresses in one day with a handwritten note, with a personalized engraving or piece or whatever. So it allows for people to scale their thoughtfulness. It allows for people to hit a lot of homes or a lot of business addresses or a lot of either employees or clients or referral sources, and still have every single person that receives it and not have to do double shipping and not have to ship things to the office and handwrite a note. Once we determine what's going to go out, it might be the same knife set going out to everybody, but every engraving is different. Every handwritten note can be different. So those sorts of things. So it's kind of the scaled thoughtfulness. It's not, we're selecting 500 different gifts. Mm-hmm. But if you follow the methodology in the filters, you're able to send like the spoonful of comfort. You could send that to anybody that had a passing or was sick. We send it to all the people that we know that have gotten COVID. And they're like, oh my, like Gary Vaynerchuk's president of Sasha Group. I send that to him and I included Gary and D-Rock, a couple guys. And he texted me immediately. He's like, dude, this is incredible. Like, so thoughtful. So it's like, so we're looking for the scalability and the thoughtfulness. There's a hybrid there. There's a sweet spot. And just so you guys understand, like budgeting wise, our rule of thumb is you should be reinvesting 5 to 15% of net profit back into relationships to keep them, to grow them and upsell and cross-sell. The secret sauce is when you get them to go out and want to sell for you, to want to have conversations. Mm-hmm. One of the guys I did this for, Cameron Harold, who wrote Double Double. He's coached some of the top, you may have heard him speak. He's written like 5 or 6 books.
Sure.
He speaks all over the world. When I met him, I did a $7,000 Brooks Brothers experience for him of all of his clothes in the Ritz-Carlton, like a shopping experience that he had no idea, all in his size. Mm-hmm. We continued to send him gifts for once a quarter for 10 years. People are like, why did you send gifts after you already had him as a client? And I'm like, because he then went and sold. Like I couldn't hire Cameron as a sales rep for $2 million. He's referred me multi-7 figures in deal flow and doesn't ask for a dime in return. Why? Because he's bought into who I am and our mission, and he wants to go out and advocate. And so when you can get to that third level of relationship where people are selling on their behalf because they just love who you are and what you're about, that's where you get the 100x, the 1000x ROR, the return on relationship. And so most of the things, though, I don't care if you have a billionaire, most of the things that we recommend from a gifting perspective, whatever you'd spend on a dinner out, round of golf, or ball game tickets is what you should invest on per each touch or per drip. So it's not $47 polos, but it's also not $20,000 Louis Vuitton bags. It's $200 to $2,000. Now that adds up times 300. But if you would take somebody out to a nice dinner with wine, you're going to drop $200 easy. Right. And we gladly do that and say, hey, bring your friend or bring your whoever. Like we'll drop $1,000 on a bar tab and think nothing of it. But all of a sudden, when it comes time to do gifting, it's like our budget is $14.50 for brownies or peanut brittle. It makes no logical sense when you're dealing with these people that can buy whatever they want, and they're on different diets and gluten-free and sugar and all this other stuff. So thinking through and saying, hey, we're going to make this a math equation. We profited. I don't care what your revenue is. What's your profit? And then reinvesting a small sliver of that, 10%, I kind of call it a reverse tithe. They're really buying their own gift. But if you do it thoughtfully, they're like, wow, they already had my money. They're getting a great return. They didn't have to do this. They did this because they chose to. Yeah. And that intentionality in doing it thoughtfully and world class. And if you buy too nice of a gift, in my opinion, you do the $20,000 Louis Vuitton bag, that communicates you're making too much money. Mm-hmm. Do too cheap, and then you're kind of a cheap SOB. The sweet spot is thoughtful, and at the same time being responsible as a steward of whatever the resources are. Or if you need to, instead of doing twice a year, do it 4 times a year. But I think people do either too small or too big all at once, and then it's crickets the rest of the time. The goal is to just have this consistent drip, quarter.
So John, let me ask you, so let's say, let me use Lisa and I as an example. Let's say Lisa and I were not the owners of our company, but we were an investor, and we invested somewhere between $250,000 to $500,000 with our company, within one of our apartment syndications or our fund or one of our investment opportunities. And there was somebody who was a regular investor, really liked what we were doing, was maybe, referring us a few people here and there, but not really. The relationship was good, but it was mostly about the return. Right? About what kind of return can Lisa and I get on our money?
Tit for tat. Yeah. Not necessarily like, I love doing business with Josh and Lisa Cantwell and Freeland Ventures because they really take care of me. I got an example. I got a guy right now who just asked me to refer him out of one of our deals so he could take some of the money and invest with another company in town. Dagger in the heart, right? Now I get it because it's financial investments. So he's got a bunch of money with us. He's not leaving us. He's trying to diversify is what he tells me. I need to diversify. I got to have some money in the stock market, some money, Josh, in your real estate investments, some others. But of course we want these guys to feel like they're just loved on by us, that they're super important to us, and they really don't want to take any money and take it somewhere else. So let's just say that's the client, $200,000 to $500,000 in some sort of real estate apartment syndication or something like that. It's a 55 to 75-year-old, typically a male, and they have a spouse, kids, grandkids. Yep. Where do we start? What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think that's our sweet spot. When you're dealing with, and those people are all 7-figure or above net worth, 8-figure, 9-figure, whatever. And so I think that I would lay out a plan with the cutlery. Sounds crazy, but all of those people are entertaining at home or hosting or whatever else. They're all married. I would drip on them 4 times a year. And don't get me wrong, like gifting, like you can't have a crappy return and then give great gifts and it works. Like I know you guys do great return. And then the cherry on top of the sundae is, I like Josh. I trust Josh. He gives a great return. And then on top of that, he still makes me look like a hero to my family and to my wife and whatever else. Like that's it's like the little, people will brag about the sprinkles on the sundae, but you still have to have the sundae. Like it's the little things that people will talk about. And so I'd say for you guys, somebody like that would be a 4 times a year. Hey, I'm just thinking about you, just appreciate the relationship. And the goal would be to take care of the people that do love working with you already and do appreciate who you are and the relationship, and then convert some of the people over here that they invest a lot of money, but maybe they're not as tied into you as a person yet. And they're just looking at the numbers because you want all things being equal for them to choose you. Mm-hmm. If somebody's getting if you're producing 17.4%, somebody else is producing 32.5, you're probably not going to win that necessarily unless they don't like the person or don't trust the person or some major black eye. But you're at the end of the day, there's a lot of options where people can invest money. And you want to be one of the first ones that comes to mind for their own money. And anytime they're having a financial conversation with anybody else that's in their network.
That's right.
If you do that well, you won't have a need for the Facebook ads as much because those other people if you have 300 people that just referred one person a year, that's a lot of referrals. Now they're not all going to invest, but But if you can just start to compound that. So that for me would be like, your top tier would be 4 times a year. Your mid tier would be like 3 times a year. And in that, 200, our sweet spot is like the 250 to 500 range. So it's not like crazy, but it's also not cheap. And then your entry level would be 1 to 2 times a year. It would be all at the same level of gift. Just one would be more frequent. And so anybody that even receives 1 gift a year from you, the goal is for them to be like, wow, I've been investing a long time and been in business a long time. Nobody's ever thought about me and specifically my wife this way. And actually included her name. I've had spouses of 8-9-figure CEOs come up to me and say, in tears at like gala, saying, this is the first time I've ever had somebody in business treated me with respect as a peer and included my name on something. I'm usually treated like arm candy. Mm-hmm. And I actually felt respected by what I received. I felt included. And so I still get goosebumps thinking about, because I know my wife feels that way. Oftentimes like, oh, it must be great to be married to John. You got it so easy. And she's taking care of 4 kids. And like, it is not easy to be married to an entrepreneur. And so when somebody treats my wife with respect and realizes she's the rock that's allowed me to do what I do, that relationship changes forever. And so that's really what we're trying to do, is scale that thoughtfulness and that communication of like, hey, this is from one family, from one business leader to another business leader. Just, want to honor your family and provide some tools for you to be able to celebrate with your family. Or like we do these crazy $1,000 mugs, which sounds insane, but carved into this mug is somebody's whole life story, faith, core values, legacy. I just gave one to a billionaire on a YPO stage in Orange County, and he cried like a baby, and half the audience was standing crying. Why? Because it was, he felt seen and acknowledged. And I tied in his dad, and who had just passed away, 96, who had actually redid the whole Air Force at the Pentagon. And I wove all of that into this one piece. So now, like, he's reminded of his family legacy every single day. It's something together. You can't buy. It's like you feel known.
Yeah.
So what did that mug look like? Because we did talk about glasses. Why do you choose knives over a glass or?
Yeah. So it's like a watch. If you give somebody a gold watch and they're a stainless person, like there's certain things that get into fashion where you're like, I like this Rolex, but I like a different type. Anything that has to do with sizing or fashion, like you're taking a risk by giving it. And glassware is one of those things where people have out and they have a certain preference. Knives is, for whatever reason, most people have the knife set that they got when they got married from Nordstrom or Bed Bath & Beyond. They'll have a $12,000 Viking, stove and a $15,000 like Sub-Zero fridge, but their knives are just kind of like whatever like was left from when they got married. And so if you take that item that's very utilitarian, very practical, and you don't go 1 or 2% higher, you give them like the handmade Rolex version of cutlery. And then, oh, by the way, you engrave all the pieces and make it an heirloom. It's one of those things where like most people aren't like trying to match their knife set to their decor. Glassware might be a little bit different. The reason the mug works is because it's so personal. It's carved one at a time. It takes a few weeks to make. And really the mug itself, if you looked at somebody else's mug, you'd be like, oh, that doesn't look like much. But if you look at the mug and see your own stuff, your own family and the tragedies you've overcome and whatever else, and then it comes in this crazy wood box that you open it up and it's a video from the artist talking about why it was made the way that it was for you. And so as you drink your coffee or tea every morning, you're reminded of your core values and your legacy. That applies. You don't care if the mug is ugly, because it's the story and the meaningfulness of the piece that communicates, wow. And there's that subconscious, like, you'll never drink out of another mug again. So we're keeping that artist pretty busy on those pieces. The reason I found out about that one was the artist reached out to me cold and said, John, I read the book 4 times. I've listened to 75 of your interviews. I want to give you a gift at no cost to bless your wife. And it was cold email. And I looked him up and he looked like he was 16. And I'm like, all right, he wants to do my book against me. I'll play. So I answer these questions. He drives 9.5 hours to hand deliver these $2,000 mugs. Makes me cry. When I brought him home to my wife, she cried. She's like, John, nobody's ever made a gift like this. This is unbelievable. where's he at? And I'm like, I'm getting him a hotel. He drove 9.5 hours. She's like, no, he has to stay with us. My wife lets nobody stay with us.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So this artist has made like these vases and jars that are like $2,500 that tell somebody's whole life story as a family together. That's what he did for us as well. But these artifact mugs, literally, I've given one to, I probably sent out 135 of them in the last 2 years. All my employees, all my mentors, people who were in my wedding a decade ago. You name the person, if I can find a reason to give them a mug and I know them well enough, or I can get access to their assistant or their spouse or their sibling to get the info to make it, it's almost 100% that they're going to cry when they get it. It's like their life story. It's like a lifetime achievement award as a practical piece of art.
What does that cost?
It's $1,000.
Yeah.
It's the best. It's not cheap, but I've had mentors that said, John, my $50,000 watch, if it burns in the house, I can replace it. That your mug made me cry. I can't replace this because of what it means. And so that's become like my go-to.
Yeah.
Say what?
Do you use it daily?
Every single day.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
John, where would we go from here? Where would we go from here? So, we actually got a marketing meeting I got to jump on. So I hate to cut it short, this content, this podcast, the whole thing. But this is obviously the whole concept of gifting as opposed to the mugs and the
tchotchkes and trinkets,
the logoed glassware, which was everything we were thinking about a week ago. We're not doing that. So what happens next?
Yeah. So what I would say is whether somebody wants to outsource and hire us to do it for them or whether they want to do it on their own, they need the relationship plan. If you do the relationship plan on your own, you can go to giftologysystem.com and you literally get 20 years worth of our blueprint of who you should be sending gifts to and when and how much and why. And basically we give away our blueprint for free because we know, to your point about like, how do you send out, like the shipping on 300 items is a lot, and 300 handwritten notes or even 50 handwritten notes is a lot. So most people, once they do the blueprint, they try to do it on their own. And they're like, it's a lot to play Santa Claus, even, once out of the year, let alone year round. So, but starting with that foundation of saying, hey, here's how much we're going to invest. Here's how much these relationships are worth. Here's who matters. Once you have all that segmented, then you can either do it yourself or outsource it to somebody like us. So go to Giftology System, download the spreadsheet, get your list together, and then internalize and say, hey, do we want to invest this much in our relationships, or what would a 1.0 version look like? Maybe it's not doing $1,000 mugs for 300 people. Maybe it's starting out with like some, solid base hits. And then like year 2, year 3, year 4, you start to add in and start to redirect dollars from other marketing sources and other things that you're doing towards something like this. That way, at the end of the day, the goal is long-term for it to be budget neutral.
Yeah.
These things to pay for themselves.
Fantastic.
Nice meeting you.
Yeah.
Lisa, thank you. Great questions. I could tell you were into it. What I'll say is, in general, women, like their emotional intelligence across the board, like they're way better gift givers, even without giftology. Like you understand packaging and handwritten note and details and timing. And like guys are like, can I just check a box once a year and like send bourbon or scotch and call it a day? And they don't realize that what they're communicating is somebody doesn't matter. They don't realize that they're not like getting the ROI that they want. And so anytime I can have somebody's, significant other and whatever else involved in these conversations, like when I speak to YPO, most of the wives are elbowing their husbands saying, I told you should be doing this sort of thing like 20 years ago, because they get it intuitively. They just know like women are way better relationship builders than guys are.
It's awesome.
So, hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that interview with John, myself, and my wife, Lisa, regarding gifting. I never thought of gifting that way. When I thought about gifting, you think about Christmas, you think about the holidays, Easter, you think about giving people gifts. A lot of times people expect gifts. And then when they don't get a gift, they get mad. Well, what about this concept that John talked about gifting at random times, gifting when nobody's expecting it, gifting gifts that really have a lot of heartfelt, like a lot of thought behind them. It's really an amazing strategy. And so my wife and I are completely rethinking, how do we gift for our employees, our staff, our friends and family, our private investors, everybody that comes in touch, all of our vendors that comes in touch with my companies. It's hundreds, thousands of people. And this interview with John really made me rethink what we're going to do this year to drive relationships, to really support the clients that we have, the employees, the prospects that we're working with, and how can we do a better job of surprising them and then driving that relationship even deeper, strengthening that relationship by doing something for them that they never saw coming. So if you enjoyed this interview, please go into wherever you get your podcasts, iTunes, YouTube, leave us a 5-star rating, leave us a review, leave us questions. It would mean the world to me. I'd be so grateful if you would do that and share this all over social media. Thank you so much for being a subscriber to the Accelerated Investor Podcast. We'll see you next time.
Hey, Josh here, and do you want to win a free Accelerated Investor t-shirt? All you have to do is give Accelerated Investor, our podcast, Accelerated Investor, a rating and a review on iTunes, okay? Do that now. Then send us a screenshot on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. What we're gonna do then is every week we're gonna pick our favorite rating and review, and we're gonna send that person a free t-shirt and maybe, again, some other cool, fun stuff as well from Accelerated Investors. So, again, don't forget to take a screenshot. Leave a rating, review, take a screenshot, send it to us so we know exactly who you are. And then once a week, every week on the podcast, we will announce a new winner. Don't forget to take a screenshot and send it to us so we know exactly who you are. We'll announce a new winner every week.
You've been listening to Josh Cantwell and the Accelerated Investor Podcast. Leave a comment on our iTunes channel and let us know what you want to learn next or who you'd like Josh to interview. While you're there, give us a 5-star rating and make sure to subscribe so you can be the first to hear new episodes. Follow Josh Cantwell and his companies, Strategic Real Estate Coach and Freeland Ventures, on all social media platforms now, and stay up to date on new training and investment opportunities to start your journey toward the lifestyle you've always dreamed of. Apply for coaching at joshcantwellcoaching.com.